The cold stone floor beneath Lyra's feet seemed to pulse with ancient power as she stood in the great hall. Tall, black pillars stretched up into darkness, and the air felt thick with centuries of decisions that had shaped her world. She had been here many times before, but never like this. Never as the one being judged. Her silver eyes swept across the 7 figures seated on their towering thrones. These were the oldest of her kind, vampires who had lived for thousands of years. Their faces showed no emotion, carved from marble and time. She had served them faithfully for 300 years, carrying out their orders without question. Until now.
Ira.
Nightshade, the center figure, spoke, his voice echoing through the chamber like distant thunder. You have broken our most sacred law. She lifted her chin higher, refusing to show fear, even though her heart hammered against her ribs. The memory of that night burned in her mind. The raid on the human settlement had been routine, just another feeding mission. But when she saw the small child hiding behind the wooden crates, something inside her had shifted. The little one's eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down dirty cheeks. In that moment, Lyra couldn't do it. She had turned away, letting the child escape into the night. I saved a life, she said, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. Since when is mercy a crime? A hiss of disapproval rippled through the council. The elder on the far left leaned forward, his ancient eyes glowing with anger. Mercy? You call defying our nature mercy? Our predators, child. We do not spare our prey. That child was innocent, Lyra shot back, knowing she was making things worse, but unable to stop herself. They had done nothing wrong. The center elder's laugh was cold as winter wind. Humans exist to serve us. They are cattle, nothing more. Your attachment to them has made you forget what you are. 3 centuries of faithful service, and this was how they saw her now. As broken, as weak, something that needed to be fixed. The weight of their judgment pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. We have decided your punishment, the center elder continued, rising from his throne. You will live among the humans until you remember your true nature. You will be bound to one of them, your life force connected to theirs. Your powers will be stripped away, leaving you as vulnerable as they are. Ira's breath caught in her throat. This was worse than death. To be mortal, to feel every ache and pain, to be so fragile that a simple fall could end everything. Her supernatural strength had been part of her for so long, she couldn't imagine existing without it. You will have 7 days to find your assigned mate, another elder added, his voice like grinding stone. Craftsman in the mountain town of Pine Ridge. Someone who works with his hands and carries the weight of recent loss. The binding will become permanent whether you find him or not. And when you have learned to despise him as you should. The center elder's eyes gleamed with dark promise. When you take his life with your own hands, you will be restored to us. Your powers will return, and this unfortunate lapse in judgment will be forgotten. The ritual began before she could protest further. Ancient words in a language older than civilization filled the air. Lyra felt the power draining from her body like water through a broken cup. Her enhanced senses dulled, her supernatural strength faded, and the constant hum of immortal energy that had sustained her for centuries simply stopped. She gasped, dropping to her knees as weakness flooded through her. Everything felt different. Her hearing, once sharp enough to detect a heartbeat from across a room, now barely picked up the whispers of the council. Vision, which had allowed her to see perfectly in complete darkness, now struggled with the shadows at the edges of the great hall. But worst of all was the fear. For the first time in 300 years, Lyra felt truly afraid. Not the tactical wariness of a predator, but the deep, primal terror of something that could actually be hurt, actually be killed. 7 days, the center elder repeated as 2 guards hauled her to her feet. Find him, learn to hate him, and remember what you truly are. They dragged her through corridors she had walked freely just hours before, past chambers where she had received her orders, past training rooms where she had honed her skills. Everything looked the same, but she was no longer the same person who had entered this place. At the great doors, they threw her out into the night. The cold air hit her newly mortal skin like a slap, and she shivered for the first time in centuries. Above her, stars she had never noticed before pierced the darkness. When she was immortal, night had been her domain. Now it felt vast and threatening. She stumbled down the mountain path, her legs shaking with exhaustion she had never experienced. Before, every step sent jolts of pain through her feet. Her stomach cramped with a strange emptiness she slowly realized was hunger. Not the thirst for blood that had driven her for so long, but the simple human need for food. As dawn approached, she found herself at a bus station in a small town. The ticket seller barely glanced at her as she mumbled something about Pine Ridge. She had never ridden in human transportation before, always traveling by supernatural means. The bus was loud and smelly, filled with people whose conversations seemed incredibly important to them. During the long ride, Lyra pressed her face against the window and watched the world pass by. She had seen human settlements before, but only as hunting grounds. Now she noticed things she had never paid attention to: children playing in yards, families walking together, people simply living their lives, completely unaware of the supernatural world that existed alongside theirs. The bus pulled into Pine Ridge just as the sun began to set. Lyra stepped off on unsteady legs, looking around at the small mountain town. Wooden buildings lined the main street, and she could smell pine trees and wood smoke. Somewhere in this peaceful place was the human she was supposed to find, the human she was supposed to learn to hate. But as she walked down the quiet street, past shops closing for the evening and families heading home for dinner, Lyra couldn't summon the disgust she expected to feel. Instead, she felt something she couldn't name, something that made her chest tight and her eyes burn with unshed tears. She had 6 days left to find her assigned mate. 6 days to complete her mission and return to the only life she'd ever known. But for the first time in 3 centuries, Lyra wasn't sure she wanted to go back. The punishment was meant to teach her to despise humanity. Instead, it might just teach her to understand it. And that possibility terrified her more than any enemy she had ever faced. The morning sun felt different on Lyra's skin now, or once she would have avoided its rays, fearing the weakness it brought to her kind. She now found herself drawn to its warmth. She had spent her first night in Pine Ridge in a small inn, tossing and turning on the uncomfortable bed, her body aching in ways she had never experienced before. Sleep had been strange, too. For centuries, she had simply rested during daylight hours, her mind always partially aware of her surroundings. But human sleep was different, pulled her under completely, filled with dreams she couldn't quite remember upon waking, dreams of wooden halls and gentle hands, of laughter that seemed to echo from somewhere deep in her chest. She walked through the town square, watching the locals prepare for what appeared to be some kind of festival. Colorful banners hung between the buildings, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. People moved with purpose, carrying boxes and setting up tables. Their faces were bright with excitement, and she found herself wondering what it would feel like to be part of something like this. "Excuse me?" she said to an elderly woman, arranging flowers at a booth. "What's happening here?" The woman looked up with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Oh, you must be new in town. It's our annual harvest festival. We celebrate the end of summer and the beginning of autumn. Are you visiting or planning to stay?" Lyra hesitated. She had no idea what would happen after she completed her mission. Would she even be welcomed back in Pine Ridge once she had done what the council expected? "I'm not sure yet," she said finally. "Well, you're welcome here either way," the woman said, patting Lyra's arm gently. Pine Ridge has always been a place where people can find what they're looking for. As Lyra continued through the square, she noticed a crowd gathering around one particular booth. Curious, she made her way closer and saw a man arranging beautiful wooden pieces on display tables. There were chairs that looked like they had grown from the earth itself, bowls so smooth they seemed to glow in the sunlight, and small figurines carved with incredible detail. The man himself was focused on his work, carefully positioning each piece. He had dark hair that fell slightly into his eyes, and his hands moved with the confidence of someone who had been working with wood for years. When he looked up in there, eyes met across the crowd. Lyra felt something she had never experienced before. It was like lightning running through her entire body, but warm instead of painful. Every nerve seemed to wake up at once, and she could suddenly feel her own heartbeat, echoing in her ears. The man dropped the wooden bowl he was holding, and it rolled across the ground, but neither of them moved to pick it up.
"Are you all right?" he asked, quickly walking around the table toward her.
His voice was gentle, concerned, and when he reached out to steady her as she swayed on her feet, his touch sent waves of warmth through her entire being. This had to be him, the human she was bound to, the one she was supposed to learn to hate. "I'm fine," she managed to say, though she felt anything but fine. Just ... tired from traveling. "I'm David," he said, and she noticed how his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. "You look like you could use some water and maybe some food." David. The name felt right somehow, like something she had been waiting to hear without knowing it. "I'm Lyra," she replied, surprised by how natural it felt. To tell him her real name? He guided her to a chair behind his booth, and she watched as he quickly poured water from a pitcher into a wooden cup. The cup was beautiful, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story. "Did you make this?" she asked. "I did," he said, looking pleased that she had noticed. "I make all of this. Furniture, bowls, little decorations, whatever people need or want." As she sipped the water, Lyra found herself studying his face. There was something sad in his eyes, a heaviness that seemed to weigh on his shoulders. Could feel it through their connection, a grief so deep it made her chest ache in sympathy. "Have you been doing this long?" she asked, genuinely curious. "About 10 years professionally," David said, sitting down beside her. "But I've been working with wood since I was a kid. My wife always said I had magic in my hands." It's the way he said wife told her everything she needed to know. Past tense. Recent loss. This was definitely the man the council had chosen for her. "She sounds like she was special," Lyra said softly. David's smile was sad, but genuine. "She was. She passed away about 6 months ago. Cancer. She used to help me at these festivals, talking to customers while I worked. She was much better with people than I am." "I'm sorry for your loss," Lyra said, and meant it. The grief rolling off him was so intense she could almost see it, like a dark cloud surrounding him. "Thank you," he said. "I almost didn't come today. These events used to be something we did together, but she would have wanted me to keep going, to keep creating things." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the festival preparations continue around them. Lyra had expected to feel disgusted by human emotion, by their weakness in their temporary lives. Instead, she found herself drawn to David's quiet strength. The way he carried his pain but didn't let it stop him from moving forward. "Where? Are you staying?" David asked suddenly. "The inn can be pretty expensive, especially during festival time." "I hadn't really thought about it," Lyra admitted. She had been so focused on finding him that she hadn't considered what would happen afterward. "I have a guest room," David said, then quickly added, "I mean, if you need a place to stay." "I live in a cabin about 10 minutes outside town. It's quiet, and you seem like you could use some peace." The offer was exactly what she needed, but it also made her mission more complicated. How was she supposed to learn to hate someone who showed her such kindness? Someone who offered shelter to a stranger without asking for anything in return? "That's very generous," she said. "Are you sure you don't mind?" "Not at all," David said. "To be honest, it might be nice to have some company. The cabin gets pretty quiet, especially in the evenings." As they talked, more people stopped by David's booth. Lyra watched him interact with customers, explaining his techniques and sharing stories about different pieces. He was patient with children who wanted to touch everything, kind to elderly customers who took their time deciding, and grateful for every purchase no matter how small. "You're good at this," she told him during a quiet moment. "At what?" "Talking to people, being kind. You said your wife was better with people, but you're pretty good yourself." David looked surprised by the compliment. "Thanks, I'm still learning, I guess. She used to say that every piece of wood has a story to tell, and it's my job to help it tell that story. I think the same thing applies to people." When the festival officially began that evening, David packed up his remaining pieces and showed Lyra the way to his cabin. It was a beautiful walk through pine trees and mountain meadows. She found herself really looking at the world around her for the first time in centuries. The cabin was small but perfectly crafted, with hand-carved details everywhere. Felt warm and lived in, like a real home. David showed her to a cozy guest room with a window overlooking the mountains. I usually work in the evenings, he said. But don't feel like you have to stay in your room. You're welcome to sit in the workshop if you want. Sometimes it's nice to have someone to talk to while I work. God, as Lyra settled into the guest room. That night, she realized she was in trouble. She had expected to find a weak, pathetic human she could easily despise. Instead, she had found someone whose kindness and strength were already beginning to change something deep inside her. She had 6 days left to complete her mission. 6 days to learn to hate the man who had just opened his home to her. But as she listened to the sound of David working in his shop below, humming quietly to himself, Lyra wondered if she was strong enough to do what the council expected, or if she even wanted to anymore. The third morning in David's cabin brought something Lyra had never experienced before, a sense of belonging. She woke up to the smell of coffee and fresh bread, sounds she was beginning to associate with home. Through her window, she could see David already working in his outdoor workshop, his hands moving skillfully over a piece of oak. Morning, he called out when she stepped outside. "I made extra coffee if you want some." "Thank you," she said, accepting the warm mug he offered. The simple gesture felt more intimate than it should have. Their fingers brushed as he handed her the cup, and she felt that familiar spark of connection run between them. Over the past 2 days, they had fallen into an easy routine. David worked on his projects while Lyra watched, asking questions about his techniques, while she found herself fascinated by the way he could look at a rough piece of wood and see the beautiful object hiding inside it. "How do you know what to make?" she asked, settling into the chair he had placed beside his workbench. "The wood tells me," David said with a smile. I know that sounds crazy, but each piece has its own personality. This one," he patted the oak, "he was working on, wants to be a rocking chair. I can feel it." Lyra watched him work, noting the way his entire body relaxed when he held his tools. "You're happy when you're creating," she observed. "It's the only time I feel like myself anymore," David admitted. "After Lisa died, everything else felt hollow. But when I'm working with wood, I can still feel her with me. She used to say that. I put a piece of my soul into every project." Lisa, his wife's name was Lisa. Lyra felt a strange pang of something she couldn't identify. Jealousy? That was impossible. She was a vampire, sent to destroy this man. She couldn't be jealous of his love for his dead wife. "Tell me about her," Lyra said softly. David's hands stilled on his work. "Are you sure? Most people get uncomfortable. When I talk about her." "Not most people," Lyra said, and realized how true that was. A slow smile spread across David's face. She was a teacher. 2nd grade. She had this way of making everyone feel important, you know? Kids, adults, even. Stray cats. She'd bring home injured animals all the time, nurse them back to health in our spare bedroom. As he talked, Lyra could see the love in his eyes, the way his whole face lit up with memories. Instead of the disgust she expected to feel, she found herself drawn to his capacity for devotion. In her world, love was seen as weakness. But watching David, she was beginning to understand that love might actually be the greatest strength of all. "She sounds wonderful," Lyra said. "She was. She would have liked you, I think. She always said I needed more friends." David picked up his carving knife again. "What about you? Any family back home?" Lyra hesitated. How could she explain that her family was a council of ancient vampires who had sent her here to kill him? "It's complicated," she said finally. "Most families are," David said with understanding. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." His easy acceptance made her chest tighten. Moore had ever given her space to be uncertain before. In her world, everything was absolutes, commands to be followed without question. "Can I try?" Lyra asked suddenly, nodding toward the wood in his hands. David looked surprised. "You want to carve? I want to understand what you feel when you do it." He showed her how to hold the knife, how to work with the grain of the wood instead of against it. "Don't force it," he said, his hands covering hers to guide the movement. "Let the wood show you where it wants to go." The touch of his hands on hers sent warmth shooting up her arms. Through their mysterious connection, she could feel his patience, his desire to share something he loved with her. When she made her first successful cut, his pride felt like sunshine in her chest. "You're a natural," he said, watching her work. "Look at that curve. It's perfect." Lyra stared at the small piece of wood in her hands. She had created something beautiful. For centuries, she had only been an instrument of destruction. But here, in this quiet workshop, she was learning to build instead of tear down. That afternoon, they walked into town together. David needed supplies, and Lyra found herself curious about the community that had welcomed her so easily. At the hardware store, old Mr. Peterson asked about her like she was part of the family. At the grocery store, the young cashier complimented her on the scarf she was wearing. "Everyone's so friendly here," Lyra said as they walked home, their arms full of supplies. "Small towns are like that," David said. "Everyone looks out for everyone else. When Lisa got sick, the whole town rallied around us. People brought food, helped with chores, sat with her when I had to work. I couldn't have made it through without them." "And now they're doing the same for you," Lyra observed. "And for you, too," David said. "You're part of us now, whether you realize it or not. Part of them." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. She had never been part of anything except the council's hierarchy. Even there, she had been a tool, not a member. But here, in this small mountain town, people accepted her without question. That evening, as David worked on his rocking chair, Lyra found herself carving a small bird. The wood seemed to come alive under her hands, revealing delicate feathers and a graceful curve to the neck. She had never felt anything like the satisfaction of creating something beautiful. "That's incredible," David said, looking over her shoulder. "You've got real talent." "I've never made anything before," Lyra said, still staring at the bird in. "Wonder I was always told I was only good at ... other things." "Well, whoever told you that was wrong," David said firmly. "You have gentle hands. Artist's hands. Gentle hands." If only he knew what these hands had done, the lives they had taken. But looking at the small wooden bird, Lyra began to wonder if maybe she could be someone different. Someone who created, instead of destroyed. As the night grew darker, Lyra felt the familiar stirring of her remaining vampiric instincts. The hunger wasn't as strong as it used to be, but it was still there, gnawing at her. She found herself watching David's throat. As he worked, imagining the pulse of blood just beneath his skin. "I should go to bed," she said abruptly, standing up. "Are you okay?" David asked, looking up with concern. "You look pale." "Just tired," Lyra said, though tired wasn't the right word. She was fighting a war inside herself, and she wasn't sure. Which side was winning? In her room, she stared at herself in the mirror. Her reflection showed a woman caught between two worlds. Her eyes still held traces of their supernatural silver, but there was something else there now. Something warmer, more human. For days left. For days to complete her mission and return to her old life. But as she listened to David moving around downstairs, humming softly to himself, Lyra realized she didn't want her old life back. She wanted this, the warmth, the belonging, the simple joy of creating something beautiful. She wanted David. The thought terrified her more than any enemy she had ever faced, because wanting him meant betraying everything she had been taught. Protecting him meant betraying the only family she had ever known, as sleep finally claimed her. Lyra dreamed of wooden birds taking flight, carrying her away from the darkness. She had always known toward a light she was only beginning to understand. The fourth night changed everything. Lyra woke to the sound of something crashing downstairs, followed by a groan of pain. Her heart jumped into her throat as she rushed from her room, not even stopping to put on shoes. She found David collapsed on the kitchen floor, his body shaking uncontrollably. Sweat poured down his face, and his skin was burning hot to the touch. The coffee mug he had been holding lay shattered beside him, its contents spreading across the wooden floor. "David!" she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. "What's wrong? What happened?" He tried to speak, but could only manage broken whispers. His eyes rolled back, and his whole body convulsed like he was fighting an invisible enemy. Through their connection, Lyra could feel his pain as if it were her own. It was like fire running through his veins, burning him from the inside out. Terror gripped her heart as she realized what was happening. The mystical bond that connected them was killing him. His human body couldn't handle being linked to a supernatural being, even one as weakened as she had become. The very thing that had brought them together was slowly destroying the person she had come to love. "No, no, no," she whispered, gathering him into her arms. His fever was so high she could feel it through her clothes. This can't be happening. Not now. She carried him to his bedroom, surprised by how light he felt in her arms. Even with most of her vampiric strength gone, she was still stronger than an ordinary human. She laid him on the bed and covered him with every blanket she could find, but he continued to shake as if he were freezing. For hours, she stayed beside him, using cool cloths to try to bring down his fever. Nothing worked. If anything, he seemed to be getting worse. His breathing became shallow and labored, and sometimes he would call out names she didn't recognize, lost in fevered dreams. As dawn approached, Lyra made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She couldn't let him die because of her. She couldn't watch the kindest, most genuine person she had ever met suffer for something that was her fault. "David," she said softly, taking his burning hand in hers, "I need to tell you something. I need to tell you the truth about what I am." She started at the beginning. She told him about the Council of Vampires, about her 3 centuries as their enforcer. She explained about the punishment, about being bound to him against both their wills. She told him about the mission to learn to hate him, to kill him with her own hands. Through it all, David listened with eyes that grew clearer as her story continued. The fever seemed to break as she spoke, as if the truth itself had the power to heal him. "I know this sounds impossible," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know you probably think I'm crazy, but I swear to you, everything I'm telling you is real, and the bond between us is killing you." When she finished, David was quiet for a long time. He studied her face in the pale morning light, and she braced herself for the horror, the rejection, the fear she was sure would come. Instead, he reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "I believe you," he said simply. "What?" "I believe you," David repeated, his voice stronger now. "I felt it, Lyra. Ever since you arrived, I felt different. Like I could sense things about you that didn't make logical sense. Your eyes in the dark, the way you move, the way you seem to know things you shouldn't know. You're not afraid." "Of me?" David sat up slowly, his fever finally breaking. "Should I be? You could have killed me 12 times over the past few days. Instead, you've sat by my bedside all night taking care of me." "The Council expects me to kill you," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. "They want me to prove that humans mean nothing to me." "And what do you want?" David asked. The question hung in the air between them. What did she want? For 3 centuries, she had wanted only to serve the Council, to be the perfect weapon they had created. But now, looking into David's eyes, she knew exactly what she wanted. "Want to save you," she said, "even if it means losing everything." Else David smiled, and despite everything they were facing, she felt warmth spread through her chest. "Then we'll figure this out together." "You don't understand," Lyra said desperately. "The bond is getting stronger every day. It's going to keep making you sick. Eventually, it will kill you, unless you kill me first," David finished. "Or unless we find another way." "There is no other way," the Council made sure of. "That maybe the Council doesn't know everything," David said. "You said this punishment was unusual, right? Maybe they've never had to deal with someone who actually fell in love with their assigned mate." Love. There it was, the word neither of them had dared to speak. But hearing it from David's lips made it real, made it something they could face together. "I do love you," Lyra said, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff. "I know it's impossible. I know it complicates everything, but I can't help it." "It's not impossible," David said, pulling her closer. "It's the most real thing I've felt since Lisa died. You brought me back to life, Lyra. You made me remember what it feels like to hope for something." They held each other as the sun rose fully, painting the room in golden light. Lyra felt something she had never experienced before, a sense of completeness, like she had found the missing piece of herself she hadn't even known was lost. But their peace was short-lived. As the day wore on, David's symptoms returned. The fever came back stronger than before, and this time cool cloths and kind words weren't enough to help him. "I have to go back," Lyra said as she watched him struggle. "I have to face the council and find a way to break this bond without losing you." "That's suicide," David said through gritted teeth. "You said yourself, they'll destroy you if you don't complete the mission." "Then at least you'll live," Lyra said. "It's all that matters now." "No," David said firmly, grabbing her hand with surprising strength. "We're in this together, remember? You're going back to face them, then I'm going with you." "You can't. You're human. You wouldn't survive 5 minutes in their world." "Maybe not," David said. "But I won't let you face them alone. Besides, maybe it's time someone showed them that humans aren't as weak as they think." Looking at David, burning with fever, but still determined to protect her, Lyra realized that the council had been wrong about humans all along. They weren't weak. They were brave in ways that immortal beings could never understand. They loved knowing that loss was inevitable. They hoped, despite overwhelming odds. They fought for each other even when fighting seemed pointless. "Okay," she said finally. "We'll face them together. But first, I need to use what's left of my power to stabilize you. It might weaken me even more, but it should buy us some time." "Do it," David said. Lyra placed her hands on David's chest and reached deep inside herself for the last remnants of her vampiric abilities. She poured her own life force into their bond, using every ounce of supernatural energy she had left to strengthen him. Effort left her gasping and weak, more human than she had ever been. But David's breathing steadied, his fever broke completely, and the color returned to his cheeks. "How long do we have?" he asked. "I don't know," Lyra admitted. "Maybe a day, maybe less. But it should be enough time to reach the council." As they prepared for the journey that would determine both their fates, Lyra realized that she was no longer the same person who had been cast out just a few days ago. David hadn't just touched her heart, he had awakened her soul. And now, together they would face the darkness that had created her. She only hoped that love would be enough to light their way. Part 5. The choice. The journey back to the council chambers felt like walking into a nightmare. Lyra led David through winding mountain paths she had once traveled with supernatural speed. But now they moved at human pace, her remaining strength focused on keeping him stable through their bond. "Are you sure about this?" she asked him for the 10th time as they approached the ancient stone entrance. "Once we go in there, there's no turning back." David squeezed her hand. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Doors opened before them with a sound like thunder. Inside, the great hall looked exactly as Lyra remembered, cold, posing, designed to make anyone who entered feel small and powerless. But walking beside David, she felt stronger than she ever had as the council's enforcer. The 7 elders sat on their thrones, their ancient faces showing surprise at seeing 2 figures instead of 1. The center elder's eyes glowed with anger as he realized what had happened. "You have failed us, Lyra, Nightshade." His voice boomed through the chamber. "You were sent to learn hatred, not to bring your prey before us like some pathetic offering." "I haven't failed," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I've learned something far more valuable than hatred." Silence. Another elder hissed. "Ow. You were supposed to kill the human and return to us cleansed of your weakness. Instead, you parade him before us like a trophy." David stepped forward, and Lyra felt his courage through their connection. Even faced with creatures that could destroy him with a thought, he showed no fear. "She's not weak," David said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. "She's evolved. She's found something you've forgotten even exists." The elders laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "And what could a mere human possibly teach us?" The center elder asked mockingly. "How to grow," David replied simply. "How to change. How to choose love over power." Love. The word dripped with disgust from the elder's lips. "Love is the disease that has infected our kind. It makes us weak, vulnerable, pathetic." "Right." "No," Lyra said, finding her voice. Love made me stronger than I ever was as your weapon. When I cared only about power, I was hollow inside. But loving David has given me something worth fighting for. Then you choose him over us? The center elder asked. You choose mortality over immortality? Weakness over strength? Lyra looked at David, seeing the love and acceptance in his eyes. She thought of their quiet mornings in his workshop, the simple joy of creating something beautiful together, the warmth of belonging somewhere for the first time in her existence. I choose life over existence, she said. I choose connection over isolation. I choose becoming someone better over staying someone powerful. The elders rose from their thrones, their forms seeming to grow larger and more menacing. Then you will die together, the center elder declared. We will destroy you both and find another enforcer, one who remembers what it means to be vampire. But as they prepared to strike, something unexpected happened. From the shadows at the edges of the great hall, other figures began to emerge. Vampires Lyra recognized, ones she had worked alongside for decades. They moved slowly at first, uncertainly, but with growing confidence. Wait, one of them called out. It was Helena, a vampire who had served the council for over 2 centuries. Perhaps we should listen to what they have to say. Do you dare question our authority? Another elder snarled. I question whether authority without wisdom is worth following, Helena replied. Lyra was the best of us. If she believes there's another way to exist, maybe we should consider it. More vampires stepped forward. Thomas, who had always been quiet and thoughtful. Rebecca, who had once mentioned missing the sunlight. Others whose names Lyra had forgotten, but whose faces showed the same exhaustion she had felt for so long. I'm tired, Thomas said simply. Tired of endless nights with no purpose except to inspire fear. Tired of existing without living. I want to know what it feels like to create something instead of destroy, Rebecca added, her voice barely above a whisper. The elders looked around in shock as more and more of their followers began to speak up. What had started as Lyra's individual rebellion was becoming something much larger, you see, David said, addressing the entire assembly. This isn't about one vampire choosing love over duty. This is about all of you choosing to become something more than you've always been. Humans have something we lost long ago, Lyra added. They know that life is precious because it's limited. They love deeply because they know loss is inevitable. They create beauty because they understand that not everything has to be about power. And they grow, Helena said, stepping closer to Lyra and David. They change. They learn. They become better than they were. When was the last time any of us truly changed? The center elder's face contorted with rage. This is madness. We are the apex predators of this world. We do not learn from cattle. Maybe that's the problem, Thomas said quietly. Maybe thinking of ourselves as predators is what made us empty inside. A transformation was happening in the Great Hall. Vampires who had followed orders without question for centuries were suddenly asking themselves what they really wanted. The rigid hierarchy that had controlled them for millennia was cracking under the weight of a simple question. What if there was a better way to exist? You want to know what I learned from humans? Lyra said, her voice growing stronger. I learned that the greatest strength isn't the power to destroy, but the courage to protect what you love. I learned that real immortality isn't living forever. It's creating something that outlasts you. She gestured to David. This man lost the love of his life, but instead of becoming bitter, he channels his grief into creating beautiful things. He opens his home to strangers, chooses kindness. When he could choose anger, that's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. The center elder raised his hand, power crackling around his fingers. Enough. You will all remember your place. But as he prepared to strike, something unprecedented happened. The other vampires moved to shield Lyra and David. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to show that the council's absolute authority was no longer absolute. Stand down, Helena commanded, her own power rising to meet the elders. We choose a different path. What followed wasn't a battle, but an exodus. Vampire after vampire chose to walk away from the council's rule. Some went alone, others in small groups. Some spoke of finding their own way to connect with the human world. others of simply discovering who they could become when they weren't defined by fear and power. The great hall that had once been filled with unquestioning servants became nearly empty. Only the elders remained, their faces showing something Lyra had never seen there before: uncertainty. "This isn't over," the center elder warned as Lyra and David prepared to leave with the others. "You're right," Lyra said. "It's just beginning." Outside the ancient chambers, as dawn broke over the mountains, Lyra felt the mystical bond between her and David shifting. Instead of the painful, draining connection the council had forced upon them, it became something chosen, something that strengthened both of them instead of weakening one. "What happens now?" David asked as they walked hand in hand toward their new future. "Now we go home," Lyra said. "We go back to Pine Ridge, and I learn how to live instead of just exist. We build something beautiful together and the others." Looked back at the vampires who had chosen to follow them into uncertainty, rather than remain in the security of their old ways. They'll find their own paths. Some will probably struggle, some might even fail, but they'll be choosing their own destinies for the first time in centuries. Back in Pine Ridge, the town welcomed them with the same open arms they had always shown. If anyone noticed that some of the new arrivals were unusually pale or preferred to work night shifts, they didn't mention it. The community had always been a place where people could start over. That didn't change now. Lyra and David opened a workshop that became something between a school and a sanctuary. They taught woodworking to anyone who wanted to learn, but more importantly, they created a space where beings from different worlds could discover what they had in common. Years later, Lyra watched David teaching a young vampire how to carve her first wooden flower. She realized that the council's punishment had indeed taught her something important about humans. But it wasn't hatred they had awakened in her. It was hope. The human mate who was supposed to be her punishment had become her salvation. And in saving her, he had shown an entire community of immortal beings that love, not power, was the force that could truly transform the world.